Good evening, everyone. We are here at the Oregon Innovation Center at Oregon High School for the board meeting tonight. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Katie, could you read the roll, please?
Ms. Vizak? Here. Ms. Garrison? Mr. Maring? Here. Dr. Lakuta? Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Pankratz? Ms. Flanagan?
Present.
Excellent. We do have, Krista is on the phone with us. We have our typical agenda items, the consent calendar we will talk about shortly. We've got some information items coming from, we actually have a graduation here tonight, which I'm very happy to hear. We'll have public comment. Sam and Olivia are here to speak from the students' perspective. And then we will go through our typical committee reports, and we'll hear from Dr. Bergstrom on visioning, teaching and learning, as well as her superintendent's report. Does anybody have anything else to add to the agenda that isn't already present? All right, very good. The proof of notice is here. If anybody needs to take a look at that, we do have a proof of notice. And so we will start with item A, the consent calendar. Oh, I'm sorry. We all have the agenda in front of us. I need a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as printed.
Troy? Second. Kevin? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, carries. Thank you. Yes. Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Gina. So if you could read the roll.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Ms. Vizak?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes. All right. So we have an approved agenda. We'll go to item A, the consent calendar. A couple of things that I would like to note from the consent calendar. First of all, we have a retirement, actually, on the consent calendar. Amy Schleins is retiring at the end of the year after 23 years as a fifth grade teacher at Rome Corners. So I'd like to thank Amy for all her years of service to our district and our fifth graders in our district. We also have a few donations. We have a donation from the Oregon football seniors' parents for $1,400 for the weight room sound system. We have a donation from Douglas Davis for $2,400 for the Oregon Brooklyn splash pad. A donation from the Optimist Club of Oregon and Brooklyn for $189.58 for the Oregon Brooklyn splash pad. And we have a donation from Brian and Angelica Petrovic giving account in the amount of $600, a donation for Chris Burns' kindergarten class at Netherwood Knoll. And with that, if I could get a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you, Kevin.
I'll second.
Troy, thank you. And if we could take a roll, please. Katie?
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Vizak?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes. Great. Carries unanimously. We'll move on to section B, information items. We'd like to start with a graduation. I'd like to call on Jen Schmidt to introduce our soon-to-be graduate. That is great. That's great. Congratulations, Josie. And to your parents as well. I think that is awesome that you took some time to think about it, came back. It will pay many times over, I assure you. All right. Then next we will move on to public comment. District Policy 180.05 provides an opportunity for the public to address the board. We value the public period and feedback from our stakeholders. To comply with the open meetings law and to ensure consistency, public comment will have the following parameters. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to make their comments. Ms. Katie Heitz here will signal the speaker when their time is up. The board will not comment after each speaker and will reserve discussion to any items on the agenda. Speakers are welcome to stay for the meeting. Next steps following public comment may include a referral to the appropriate administrator for follow-up with the speaker or placement of the matter on a future board agenda. Katie, do we have anybody here to speak tonight? There's nobody registered. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak? Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak? All right, very good. Thank you. Next, we have the OEA report. It's my understanding there's nothing to report this evening from the OEA. And next, the student report. Sam and Olivia are here and have a number of things prepared. So who would like to begin?
All right, I will begin. My name's Sam, and we can just start out with talking about some things that we've done with the SSAC with Dr. Bergstrom. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is our student feedback form was launched last week, and we've had some amazing and thoughtful responses from the student body on the form, and we plan to use those to formulate kind of opinions that the students have given us. And we are hoping to get a lot more responses, ranging from topic to topic, negative, positive. We'll take anything we get, and we're really happy about that. Next thing is during our meeting on Friday, we had the quarterly meeting. So all the quarterly members of the SSAC got to join us in addition to the current members. And it went awesome. There was a bunch of awesome feedback given by students, so we can kind of use that information. And another thing is talking about masks again. I think, and Olivia, masks optional has gone great at OHS. The school environment has been awesome. We haven't had any issues or anything with that. Students have been respecting each other, and the quality of life at OHS is awesome. So that's one thing. The OHS choir department had a concert on March 8th. It went very well. I'm in choir. It went good. We are very proud of our peers in music and all the music departments. And it's Olivia.
And then just a few more things. The boys basketball team participated in the sectional finals, and they played very well. And then the student lead interview containing information provided our school with the student resource officer about students' rights at OHS. And so that was something we did talk about at our last SASC meeting. And that was something lots of students felt really passionately about, was everyone being educated on student rights and the rights we have. And so that was displayed on March 10th on our Panther Vision, and everyone was really excited about that.
Excellent. Does anybody have are there any questions for Olivia and Sam? I had a chance to go to the basketball games last week, and I have to say the students were well behaved, and they came out in droves. It was very impressive. I was up at the Baraboo game, and we had a very good showing. And it was a challenging game, without question. So I just want to hand it to the leadership, the student leadership, because clearly people were behaving very well, which is great not only from a school board member, but from a parent. So I appreciate that. Any other questions for Sam and Olivia? All right, thank you both. We don't have any action items specifically for this evening, so we'll move on to discussion items. The first item is the discussion of the elementary and secondary school emergency relief, what we know as Esser 3. Dr. Bergstrom is going to talk a little bit about the Esser 3 plan.
Thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about it because many of you had the experience of being able to be at the information night last week, and that went very well, and we'll talk about that as we talk about Esser overall. So the information night that we held for the community last week included information on how we could prioritize Esser 3 and seeking feedback on Esser 3. But this is 3. So Esser 1 was just under $100,000, and that's been allocated. That went directly for supporting the technology necessary to meet the needs of students when we first went virtual back in 2020. Esser 2 was about $460,000 or so, and once again, that was allocated very specifically for pandemic-related needs. Now, Esser 3, that's a little different, as you know, because Esser 3 is about $3 million of one-time money. So that makes it something that is much more open to our prioritization, community input, staff input, etc. So we had our information and feedback night last week. It was wonderful to have an opportunity to talk to members of the community about things that are important in the OSD and hearing from them about what they believe to be very important and seeking feedback on how to prioritize our Esser funds. So the theme of the night was really meeting our students' needs today and tomorrow. And we spoke about academic supports and mental health supports and teacher recruitment and retention, as well as healthy environments. We also had a station on Portrait of a Graduate, but I'll talk about that later in the evening. So for the student academic supports, and we structured it this way for all of the stations. We spoke about broad general priorities, and then what are examples of things that we could allocate the Esser 3 funding toward. So you'll notice here for student achievement, we wrote about instructional materials, enhancing teachers' skill set and meeting the diverse student needs, and then also potential funding for short-term positions. Because remember, this is one-time money, so it can't be used to create a position that is many years, or some would say permanent, but we all know nothing is permanent. But long-term positions, we can't use the money for that because the money runs out in 2024. So we gave some examples and our priorities, and then we sought input. Same for our mental health priority. So we spoke about the needs to address our student well-being with increased mental, physical health, and educational supports. And then what are some examples of how we could allocate funding toward that? And then also, how would we address staff well-being? Because we know that staff need to be considered when we're talking about well-being in total, because how they are impacts how our students are. So all of these things were part of the conversation at the community engagement. And then we also had a station on educator retention and recruitment. And we've spoken about this before, but I'll probably take every single opportunity to speak about it. And that is the fact that, you know, we're headed into nationally a bit of a crisis related to the fact that there were fewer and fewer people entering this amazing profession. And they're having increasingly difficult circumstances when they are, because of the fact that there aren't as many people entering the profession as there have been in the past. So being the type of district that we are, we want to be able to think forward about this. How are we going to keep the amazing educators that we have and continue to recruit new ones into the profession, or new ones who have been somewhere else and would like to try some time with us? Because this is so fundamental to absolutely everything we do, we think it's worthy of consideration regarding the Esser funding also. So our Human Resources Department has developed a plan to pilot some specific retention strategies, as well as targeted strategies to recruit a more diverse staff to better reflect our student population. And then once again, implementing specific strategies to support staff wellness. So all of these things are important components. The answer isn't one thing. The answer is always many things, right? Coordinated into one solid effort. And then healthy environments, because we know from everything that we've learned about the pandemic in the last 2 years, how important it is that our environments are healthy, because that's a part of keeping our students and our staff healthy. So we've done amazing things thus far to ensure that we have the best possible ventilation systems, but we do have some things that should be under consideration for Esser funding, such as replacement of some of the HVAC systems as it reaches the end of its useful life. So all of those things were stations in the community engagement evening. And we also filmed the evening, so many thanks to Fitchburg Cable Access, who came out and were able to film it for us and gave us a link to a YouTube video that we could then send out to all of our families, so that anybody who wanted to watch the video of the evening could really get a solid understanding of what we discussed, and then hand in an online feedback form. The more feedback, the better. So this is what it looks like so far. With about 26 people adding some thoughts related to what they heard either in person or in the video. We asked them to prioritize high, medium, or low related to the 4 stations and Esser funding. And you can see that, it does tell us a story related to what's important to our community. And I think what it really means is that we are on target with the areas that we want to support utilizing this one-time funding. So we all know that aligning Esser funding with student need and our strategic priorities will be a continuous process. It's not a one-time only. It'll be something that we're talking about and evaluating for the next 2 years to make sure that we're continually looking at data and moving supports when we need to. And once again, I'll stress, it is not money for our regular budget. This is one-time money that can go toward things that are extremely targeted because of the limited amount of time and funding. So that's really an update on the Esser portion of our community night.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. Any questions for Dr. Bergstrom about the evening last week or the information that came out of it? I was happy to be able to attend that meeting, and it's always nice to see people who you don't normally see at meetings like that. People who either have been too busy to come or haven't had enough interest or time to come. And it's great to talk to those folks because one thing I have found, especially for people who are busy and can't make some of those functions, they're typically busy with lots of other people. And so they're hearing and sharing what they learned in sessions like that. So I was happy to see some of that going on for sure.
May I make one more comment?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to add that this isn't the only feedback that our attendees gave us. This is how they prioritized what we put out in front of them, but they also wrote narratives related to what they believe to be important. So they gave us specific ideas in addition to this. I wanted to make sure that that was included so people didn't think that we weren't also taking seriously the feedback that was given to us in a different format.
Yes.
Leslie, could you talk a little bit about the timeline for the Esser funding? So, I mean, it's coming in now. I know we're talking about, you mentioned like the K-8 math interventionist. I'm assuming that applies for 22-23 school year. And like some of the other allocations, how does that apply in the timeline for our upcoming budgeting process?
Well, we'll be talking about it in the staffing report that comes on March 28th, because really with the state budget, there isn't any funding to add anything in our regular budget. So anything that you see coming to you on the staffing report in 2 weeks will only be connected to Esser, or a reallocation of some existing position. So actually, this is year 1 of Esser 3, and then 22, 23 will be year 2, and 23, 24 will be year 3. I believe it needs to be spent by September of 2024. So that is how we will be dividing it up. And some of the positions that we added that were specific to the pandemic could already have been allocated to Esser 3, such as the engagement specialists at the high school or the math interventionist grades 5 through 8.
Any other questions for Dr. Bergstrom? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the committee reports. We'll start with policy. Anna?
Thanks, Tim. Policy met last week. We did review Policy 41101 and made some recommended changes, and that will be on an agenda for a future meeting. Our next policy committee meeting, it will be scheduled or held on the third Monday in April. I don't have my calendar. Third Monday in April at 5:30. So that will be our next meeting. No other things to report.
Great, thank you. Vision steering, Troy.
Yeah, so we met on March 1st, and we had 3 agenda items. We heard from some of our staff members on early learning accommodations. So there's a need in the community for increasing our early childhood accommodations. So we heard a proposal from staff, very interesting, and the committee gave some feedback and some direction for next steps on what to further explore there. Item number 2, we had a preview of the info night. So just went over what was to be presented the following week. And then item number 3 is our recreational space and facilities study. So we received a draft RFP and provided some feedback, and that has since been initiated and sent out to some professionals to try and get interest in conducting a recreational space facilities study for the district. So that was our meeting, and then I believe we'll be meeting again in the early part of April.
Great. Any questions for Troy? Kevin?
Yes, I was not able to attend that meeting, being out of town, but help me understand the difference between the recreational space of our responsibility versus the village's responsibility. I know there was something in our packet, but I don't remember the details behind it.
Yeah, so we feel it's important to do a comprehensive study of the district students and the needs for facilities to serve our students. It's interesting, obviously our district spans many different municipalities, so if we just rely on one municipality, it doesn't really cover all of our district needs. And as the school district, we feel that there's interest in kind of serving as a central resource for all those communities to kind of bring together all of the different facilities that are out there and also look at the needs for the district-wide. So, in terms of responsibilities, I think that's all to be determined. At this point, it's more of just an inventory and a needs assessment to determine what we have and what we need. So the study will look at kind of industry standards for what number of whatever pick any facility, whatever number of soccer fields you need for this population, and also in consultation with our youth sports groups. So
Yeah, it's a great initiative. It's good, especially when you're talking, Fitchburg and Village of Oregon and all the other constituents that we consider everyone's opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point, because this effort isn't just about the district. It's about working with the Village of Oregon, Brooklyn, Fitchburg, but also with the town of Oregon. Rutland, et cetera, to understand what do they have currently in play, what are they considering, and equally as important, what is the demand for those types of facilities? What is the participation rates for those type of facilities? Village of Oregon talked about this over the last 2 years, as a matter of fact, through their park committee. And the park committee actually put forward a recommendation to work with us on this type of study from the village's perspective. And so that has already been passed through the village board. So we're looking forward to working with them and sharing not only our information, but frankly, sharing in the cost of putting something like this together, because it's a very comprehensive effort. And we'll be doing the same with Fitchburg, who we've already talked with about this, the town of Oregon, Brooklyn, et cetera. So it's a great opportunity to cross over to the municipalities that the district serves. Any other questions for Troy? Okay. Worth Woods, I will cover that. We had a chance to meet last Thursday, March 10th, with our group to talk about the elements of the strategic plan for Worth Woods. I think, Andy, could I just have you talk just briefly about what we're doing while we're gathering more information, particularly from the city of Fitchburg, what's actually happening at the same time?
Sure. So we have actually started, I think in the last week, basically carving a path through Worth Woods right now. So it connects basically Forest Edge Elementary School all the way over to County Highway MM by the Eco Center. And basically what that entailed is basically taking down any tree branches, that type of thing that could fall on the path, clearing the path area so that potentially UTV, all-terrain vehicle could get through. The reason for an all-terrain vehicle is so we can provide accessibility to any students that might need some help with being able to get through the woods and still be able to experience it. So just preparing the site while the ground was frozen in the last week or so, trying to do that before it thawed out. So that's been the main purpose over the last couple weeks.
Some of the other things that are going on with the Worth Woods discussion is about our environmental center. And the environmental center, what we can do with the environmental center is really born out of what we can do from a zoning perspective, what we can do from an environmental perspective or from a DNR perspective. And some of those conversations take longer than we all expect, without question. We do have a meeting coming up tomorrow with the city of Fitchburg, a meeting that they actually called with us. We're meeting with their engineer, their planner, their business manager, and possibly a few other people to talk about what our vision is for the environmental center, to better understand what our current capabilities are as far as that property is concerned, and what needs to be done to get to the rest of that vision. It has everything to do with access to that site. Keep in mind that that is on a county highway, and it requires lots of discussion around getting access off of a county highway. There's an environmental corridor that runs through that property, and so that takes input not only from Fitchburg, but also from the DNR. So those conversations take some time. And lastly, it's about budget. And until we know what we can do and we marry that to what we want to do, will we be able to put together a budget so that we can go out and raise the money? Because if you recall, we can't do that in our normal budget. That money needs to be raised or has identified funds specifically for improving that property. So thank you for your patience while we put that information together. We should have more to report at the March 28th meeting. Any questions about the Worth Woods project? Sorry, Krista. Without having you here, I keep forgetting you're on the phone. Do you have any questions at all?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes, Anna.
I'm just curious, so it's really exciting to hear that you're working on carving out a path. That's awesome. Are we still hopeful that that's going to be something that's available this spring for students to use?
That's a great question. Yes, that is absolutely what our plan was, is to be able to use it immediately. Now, there's still this discussion about accessibility from, having some type of vehicle that can get all kids back into the forest. So that's something that will be coming up on the 28th. The other thing that we've talked about is the meadow, which is the most visible part of the project from the back of FES. That project has been planted. We're in the process of understanding what to expect and anything else that we need to do to take advantage of the spring on that property there too. We will have something more to say about that on the 28th. But that trail has been, since the very beginning, availability to use that trail this spring has been on our radar, and that is absolutely the plan.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yes, Troy.
I do have one question. So when you were talking about funding, you mentioned, and I just need a reminder here, I guess, but you mentioned that we can't spend this general fund on improvements out there. Is that a can't, or just, how is that set up, I guess?
That's a good question. I think I'm going to ask for Andy to help me with that.
Not that we have excess money to spend, but I'm just curious.
There we go. There are no legal limitations on what we could do. So if we wanted to use funds in the district, we could do that. I think it was just something that was kind of said when we were looking to purchase the property.
Jim, I can comment on that if you'd like.
Yes, Krista, go ahead.
I think one of the things that we have to really think about is we need to see the strategic plan of the board for this project, and then we can make decisions and put that in our larger plans as facilities and all other plans for the district. So I think that's what Tim and his group is working on, and so that will come to the board so we can review the larger plans for that property and the environmental center.
Any other questions? All right, very good. Thank you, Krista. We'll move on to item E, information items, visioning and strategic plan. Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, our community engagement night last week held an opportunity for people to give input, an additional opportunity to give input on Portrait of a Graduate. And you see this here in the visioning and strategic planning framework. The green bar at the top is Portrait of a Graduate, because together with our mission, our values, the Portrait of a Graduate is really what we see for our students and their future. So this is a really important part of our strategic planning process, because it really does unite all of us in what we commonly hope for and aspire to for every single one of our students. So we have been in this input and design loop for a while now, and it's been going really well. Leadership teams at schools have weighed in, community has weighed in, the focus groups have had a couple of opportunities to weigh in, as have the administrative team and the visioning and policy committee. So we're getting close. We still need some student impact. So Sam and Olivia, or student input, Sam and Olivia will be a part of that process in the near future. But what we found out at the community engagement is overall, those people who gave input did say that what we have developed thus far represents the aspirations that they hold for the OSD graduates. And people who were in the feedback or in the focus groups and who came also said that it matched. And I think that was really helpful to hear from people, because this has gone through several drafts now, right? A lot of input from a lot of people. So to hear that it still felt very aligned with what the focus groups told us last summer is very helpful. Now, we did have some people give specific input related to things that they would like to see further emphasized, etc., in the portrait, but that's wonderful. That's exactly why we had the evening. It's so that we could get different people with different opinions to take a look at it with fresh eyes. So that was really important to us, and I'll stop there to see if anyone has any questions specific to that before I go to the teaching and learning update.
Any questions at all regarding this portion, the Portrait of a Graduate portion? One thing that I was excited to see folded into the Portrait of a Graduate, or the draft of the Portrait of a Graduate, is this whole issue around financial knowledge, just understanding how financially to be a productive part of our society. We heard it again at the community input session last week. So it was great to see it heard when this was originally talked about, and that it was validated again during the community input session. And I know that we've talked about it in policy as well. So just one example of listening and turning that into action. Any other questions about Portrait of a Graduate? Okay, teaching and learning update.
All right, so a couple of weeks ago, the last meeting, you had John Tanner, who came up and spoke about academic supports and how they fit into the continuum of supports that we've been speaking about frequently. Tonight, you'll have Dr. Candace Widensee, our Director of Student Services, and Darcy Krieger, who is the Assistant Director for Learning and Student Achievement. And they're here tonight to talk specifically about mental health supports. And you know that we usually give a mental health update right around this time every single year, because we like that information to be fresh in your mind when we have staffing discussions. Because as you know, we frequently come forward and ask for additional support in this area. And while there won't be regularly budgeted funds, I'm sure you'll be hearing from us related to Esser funding and the needs that you will hear about tonight.
That's okay. That's
Thank you, Katie. Okay. So we are going to start to take a look at some national data that was collected from the National Institute for Healthcare Management. The story in this data is going to allow us to look at mental health trends from a national level, and then we're going to drill down into our community's data. In this slide, each line represents a different age band. So dark blue on the top is 16 and 17-year-olds, the middle is 14 and 15, and the bottom is 12 to 13-year-olds. As you can see, when you read this graph from left to right, it shows us a trend since 2004 of all age groups experiencing heightened rates of depression. So this slide now just continues to allow us to lean into the national data. It shows us that increased depression rates for our youth have been exacerbated by the pandemic. The slide shows the stressors and the barriers to care that the pandemic has added to an already stressful time. Obviously, all of these stressors and barriers have affected our community in one way or another over the course of the pandemic. So now the next slide, we're going to move into from a national perspective and start talking about our community.
So this data is from the Dane County Youth Assessment, and it shows you over the course of time, beginning from 2012 all the way through 2021, the trend lines for our students at the middle school as well as those at the high school. And it really does show that that trend of increasing reports of anxiety has proven to be true for the Oregon and Dane County community as well as the national trends have shown. What this doesn't show you is that there are some subpopulations in our student body that experience greater levels of anxiety and depression than even what this shows. And those populations tend to be our students who are in lower socioeconomic groups, our students who identify as LGBTQ or non-binary, and also primarily our female students that have a higher rate than our male students. So those are the groups that really trend toward higher levels of anxiety and depression across the board. So now these are some screeners and assessments that we do in district. And this is where we start to work on what we're seeing the trends show us. So the social emotional skills assessment is our panorama assessment, and we began using the panorama last spring. And for the most part, when Leslie showed you that data earlier this year, it looked like our students did pretty well when compared to the national norm group. The areas that we chose to focus on were sense of belonging from 7-12, and I think one of the elementaries as well. But mostly at the elementaries, we had focus on emotion regulation. So there are a number of areas, but those were the two spots that looked like we could use the most work in. And it made sense. The sense of belonging made sense from the perspective of a new school that was open during the pandemic, as well as just having that different connection with school during the pandemic time. So those were the areas that we focused on. And our social emotional learning coaches worked with the student services and the principals over the summer and recommended some curriculum to address both of those areas. So one of the curriculum is the Character Strong, and that is a curriculum that is used 7-12 and addresses some of that belonging piece. And then at the elementary level, it was recommended that we update our second step curriculum. So we've done that, and we've really integrated that into the K-4 student experience across the board. So we have some lessons that are taught by our counselors, some by our SEL coach, and some by our primary teachers. So we're really able to do a lot more of that curriculum across the board. The other thing that we continue to do is our CBITS screener. A couple of years ago, they added a racial component, so it's now called the REST screener, and we do that at grades 6 and 10. So in the CBITS screener, it's an overall screener that's given to all students in that classroom. And when students pop in particular questions, that group of students are then interviewed for more information. So in general, the trauma screener identifies very few students that actually meet the trauma group, which is the 10-week intervention of CBITS. But from that group of students that get interviewed, we end up with a lot of data for other kinds of groups. So that group, that interview process results in students being recommended for groups for anxiety, for stress and coping, for grief, family change, all of those kinds of groups. So we end up with, out of those students that are interviewed, providing groups to about 40 to 45% of the students interviewed. Other students in that interview process end up being identified for an individual check-in or for individual student services work, or being referred externally to our partner providers. So in general, from that group, we see up to about 70% of our students actually being seen for some sort of intervention based on those screeners. Then at the middle school, we have done the BEST screener. Last year we did it at 7th grade. This year we were able to do it at both 7th and 8th grade. And our student services staff attributed that ability to do the 2nd grade level as a result of having that social worker dedicated to the middle school level. So there again, you see the first number in the series there is the 7th grade data, and the second is the 8th grade data. So of those, again, we had upwards of 60 to 70% overall of the students that were interviewed in that. The students that were interviewed were the high risk and the elevated risk categories. So again, we saw about 68 to 70% of students that were interviewed receiving an intervention of some sort. So some of them, again, were the group interventions, and some of them were those individual interventions with our student services staff or referred to outside providers.
Okay, here is the OSD continuum of supports that Leslie talked about just a few minutes ago, and that you probably or hopefully remember John talking about a couple of weeks ago. John used the continuum of sports and gave examples of how it is used with respect to behavior. And tonight we want to just show you some examples of how we use it with respect to mental health. One thing that I want you to notice on there, you can stay on this one, it's on here too. It's okay, you can still stay there. One thing that you should notice on here is just at the bottom, the people or the people that are responsible for delivering the instruction or intervention down at the very bottom underneath the diamond looks a little bit different. So with respect to mental health, the universal is still delivered by teachers, but moving on to the second level on each side, we add in the teachers and the student services team. So the student services team, so that you are all aware, includes school counselors, school psychs, social workers, SEL coaches. And the third level, it talks about specialists joining the team for intervention and instruction. And in this case, specialist refers to those services that are delivered by our outside service providers. So on this slide, we're going to give you those examples then of what different levels of support look like. And so at the universal level of support, the first thing you see is the Courage Retreat. And this was a grant-funded opportunity for the middle school where throughout the course of the day, all of the students got to experience community and team building activities. You heard about Candace talking about Second Step, that curriculum that's delivered universally to K-6, and Character Strong 7-8 or 7-12. There's also Zones of Regulation that is delivered, it's a curriculum delivered universally at K-4. There is Academic Career Planning. Calming Spaces or Zen Dens is another grant-funded opportunity that right now we currently have 3 schools that have them up and running, and our goal is to have the other K-6 buildings have them up and running by the end of next school year. Is that correct? And you've heard Candace talk about those universal screeners that we use at different levels and what we use them for.
So on either side of that universal level, you can see some of the targeted interventions. And this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but just some of the things that are happening. So to the far right of your universal level at the level 3 are things like Hope Squad and Imagine. And those are groups that are student groups that are trained to support their peers in, for example, Hope Squad is related to mental health, being a mental health support, anti-suicide kind of a support for students. Imagine is a group that is also supportive of students who have experienced harassment and sexual assault, things of that nature. In the level 2, we have mentors that we try to coordinate for students with particular needs. And then some of the empowerment groups or special interest groups. The KEYS group is in that group. That is a anti-AOD group. It's an anti-drug alcohol use group that goes through the middle school and elementary schools to provide some encouragement to students at the younger ages not to become users. And then in the left-hand side of the universal level are some of those groups that I mentioned previously. That came out of our CBITS group and things like that, but we have other groups as well that are like Worry Warriors, social thinking, attendance at the Ready, Set, Go conferences, so that student services staff are introducing themselves to particular students that might be at risk coming into a new setting, things like that. That can help as well. We have restorative circles that occur at that level 2 area. And then at level 3, we have our Bridges is our Dane County collaborative that provides us with that short-term crisis intervention. So we have Bridges partners, we have our agency partners with our community counseling agencies. Esser, which is a short-term intervention for students, violence risk and suicide assessments, referrals to rape crisis, and then our return to school plans that happen for students that are in day treatments or extended hospital situations. So those are some of the things that we do at those different levels as we look at the expanded services.
So when we think about the expanded outside partnerships, we didn't want to suggest that there were no mental health services prior to the pandemic, but it certainly did exacerbate our needs. So in the third level of support, these are those expanded partnerships that we have right now. These partnerships have been expanded to meet the evolving and growing needs of our students. Pre-pandemic, we had 3 outside service partnerships, and now we have 5.
In addition, last spring we wrote and received a Dane County mental health grant, and you'll see some of the things up there on the slide that the grant covered. As I mentioned previously, Character Strong and the second step upgrades were purchased out of the Dane County grant, as were the materials and supplies for calming or Zendens. So when we agreed to take the money, we also agreed to report out on a quarterly basis how those funds were being used. And it's actually an awesome kind of a thing to be able to report back, because you hear anecdotally how things are. So the last quarter that we reported on, one of the principals told me that the students actually, when they come down to use the Zenden, they are using their zones of regulation language. They're able to identify what they need and be able to decide, do they need big movement or do they need more calming kinds of activities to reset themselves, to get themselves back in a learning zone, in the green zone, to go back to the classroom. That's an awesome kind of a report back to be able to share. One of the other things that staff said is that they were using the Zenden data to track interventions differently. So there was a group of students on a team that were using the Zendens more frequently than others. So they took a look at that data, they figured out what was the problem, they made some SEL lessons specific to the issues, and were able to then implement those in that particular team area. So it's been a really great experience, and we're anxious to get some of those spaces in the other buildings as well. Then the last part that we've been using that Dane County funding for is to address that group of students that I said at the beginning are heavily impacted, which is the socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So the Dane County grant provided for us an opportunity to use the funding to pay for the counseling for students who can't afford to pay for it themselves, whose insurance is a barrier in some way, co-pays are too high or whatever it is. So we have been able to provide counseling for a number of students through the grant. At the beginning, we probably had a high of 9 students that were using the grant for counseling purposes. That has over time reduced, because our partners understand that once the money runs out, we hope if the students continue to need services, there's a way for them to get it. So they've worked really hard at being able to shift insurances or accept insurance providers at their agency, or get insurance providers to approve of a non-provider. I don't know how that's done exactly, but you know, like when it's not your provider approval for that. So they've been working really hard on that, but that continues to be an area that we have needs in. In fact, last week I had a provider ask me for 2 students to use the grant to cover 2 students. So it is an area that I feel really, you know, it's not a high number of kids, but it's an important group that we're addressing through that funding. And then lastly, we have our kind of continuous improvement cycle. You can move it to the next. Our continuous improvement cycle through our district mental health committee to always be looking at what are we implementing, what grade levels are we assessing, are we doing the right assessments, getting the right information, and then looking at that data to see what do we need to do next. So that's sort of where we then get to what are the recommendations for additional services and supports that Leslie was talking about through Esser. we do know that with that increased needs that we've seen over the course of time, as well as through the pandemic, that our student services departments have been responding really amazingly well to the unique needs of students. So when our providers, both our partners that we listed as well as those in the community in general, are at their max capacity, it is our student services staff who are seeing the kids and remain their primary support for mental health needs. So that's just an awareness kind of a thing for you guys that we do have providers that will have at any given time up to 2 months waiting lists, things like that. And so when that happens, it's our student services staff that continue to be those support structures for the students. So we are looking to continue to work with the admin team on what are the recommendations for short-term supports through Esser, and then ultimately, when the budget gets better, what we will need long-term. We hope it gets better at some point. The other place that we think about that Leslie mentioned in the community group is the support for our educators. So we have tried at times to be providing support through student services to the educators through compassion, resilience, and things like that. It has been tough this year for our educators. They have not necessarily always had time to take care of themselves. So we have had on the screen earlier some thinking about how to make that a longer-term, healthier prospect for students, both through Gina's screen as well as through some professional development kinds of things, so that we are making sure that we are responsive to their needs as well. And I think that's it for me.
Wow, that's a lot of information. There's a lot going on. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions? Yes, Anna.
You touched on this here at the end, but one of my questions was related to whether or not our external partners have the capacity that is needed for the referrals, and it sounds to me like the answer to that is no. And so it sounds also that we are, as a district, providing those supports during either that wait time or when those situations are just not available. So that kind of answered that, but I wanted to verify that that is the case. Can you tell me, with the calming space and the Zen Den, is that staffed by somebody, or if a student requests to go to that space, how does that work is it school by school how that operates, or how does that work?
It is a little bit school by school how it works. I believe both Roam Corners and Forest Edge have someone who is able to check in students and make sure that they are getting what they need, and not spending all day in there, but, like leaving at appropriate times, that kind of thing. At Brooklyn, they don't have staff, but they send the student to the room with a staff member, a paraprofessional or something like that, so that they can use the space and then come back.
And is that how you're monitoring some of this data as to this is the reason we're going to the Zen Den, and this is what I feel I need? So a lot of that data you're collecting is coming through that process with the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they each have a check-in, check-out kind of a system in the buildings that they monitor that data. So
okay.
it's great anecdotally to hear that the kids really are learning the lessons that they're being taught through. It's
incredible to hear that it seems to be a very effective tool in our schools, and so that's awesome. And then regarding this Dane County pandemic funding that you referenced and the grant that we received, can you talk a little bit more about how much was received and whether or not we expect it to run out anytime soon? I'm just curious kind of what the longevity of that particular grant can offer our district.
We received approximately $103,000.
Okay.
We requested about $65,000 for the ability to provide the counseling to students who couldn't afford it.
Okay.
So the bulk of it was for that. Then we requested money for the Zen Dens, for the Character Strong, for some training elements for staff, for things like a couple of staff members maybe to do Breathe for Change, We have funding for a couple of staff members to be trained as trainers for restorative circles so that we can have a greater impact on the rest of the staff with some of that. But for the most part, those were the broad areas that were covered. And it will go through December of '22, unless it runs out earlier. So
Okay.
we aren't close to running out right now, but we do have funding in there yet for a couple of Zendens for the rest of the buildings, for some of those fidgets and things like that that can happen for those areas too.
Do you know how many districts within the county applied for and or received this? Is this pretty?
Well, a number of districts in Dane County applied, but all were for varying amounts. So I don't
Okay.
know, I can't say that anyone had exactly what we wrote for.
Okay. Okay.
But they probably all did some similar things in terms of being able to do some calming spaces and things like that, some lesser monetarily pieces. But I'm not aware that very many of them did the bulk of what we did, which was the counseling for underinsured, uninsured.
Okay. And then my last question might be more for Dr. Bergstrom. This is a ton of awesome data, and I was writing notes as best I could, but could we get this slide deck available to us to look at again? That's it. Thank you. Awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Great work you guys are doing. Thank you.
That we have great staff for sure. And we actually really do appreciate the addition of the social workers. That has been a great help across the district.
Awesome. Thank you so much, really.
Other questions? Kevin?
So we've established with the outside counseling that, going from 3 to 5 partners certainly was helpful, but still not enough to handle the volume of kiddos that need help at this point. When we added those additional outside resources and partners, do any of them have specific specialties that have been beneficial, and or do we need to search those out?
Well, I mean, we originally, when Leslie and I, before she became superintendent, was my co-facilitator with the mental health committee, we originally had just the 2 partners, and we kind of tried to think about what would be a way to add providers in, so that we sort of had that idea of what is the niche that we need to fill next. Certainly one of our partners currently is able to support students of color. They provide counselors of color. That is a great benefit to our students, whether they're of color themselves or not. We have one agency who has a Spanish-speaking counselor. That's another great feature for populations that we might not otherwise reach. Our LGBT students are also accommodated through our current partnerships. One of our partners has the availability of pet therapy. So they all have kind of their own unique ways of supporting our students. Really, they also have the ability to deal with some AOD issues. So right now we're pretty well rounded, actually. So I think it is really just the volume that is the difficult part, and it's not just with our providers. It is countywide, really. People are unable to have social workers for CPS as much as they need, and for our day treatments and all of those kinds of things as well. So it's not just our current providers, and it ebbs and flows. The waiting lists ebb and flow. So at any given time, they might have 2 months, and then things happen, and their referrals change.
Okay.
So.
Candace, maybe I should know this. Use an acronym CBITS. What does that stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's
That's okay.
Cognitive Behavior Intervention.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, thanks. Great information.
Any other questions? Yes, Troy.
So just a comment, it was something I learned tonight, and it was really helpful to see the different systems of supports. And when we look at like the level 2, the extension I look at that as almost like a proactive support, and I noticed on that list is the screenagers, the community information that we're gearing up to send out. So that was really good to put it into perspective and to see how that fits into this multi-level system. And also, as Anna mentioned, the zones of regulation and that link to the Zendens, it was really great to see how all of these things are becoming intertwined and that our students are learning things in the classroom that can also help them as they need that additional support. And that's just a comment, just a kudos and a big thank you to you both and to your team and to all of the partners who are doing this tremendous effort. You know, not only do you have the the great challenge of supporting our students, but you have to determine how to use your resources very wisely. And I can see that is, a great feat in itself, and relying on our partners and our internal staff. And there are capacity constraints, right? We have a cap on our grant, we have a cap on our internal resources, and so it just needs to be mentioned that you are doing a great job with what you have at hand, and our community really appreciates it. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions at all? I just have a couple of questions. Yes, Krista.
Sorry. I know it's awkward with me on the phone. I just have a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. First, Candace, you've been with our district a long time, and you are worth your weight in gold. This is such a difficult area to manage, and things have changed over time, and our kids are struggling. And I just really want to commend you and your team that you've really took to heart our full child emphasis value, and you've dug deep with data and helped our system and taken the investments that we've made, and you've really benefited students and families. This is tough work, and you are an amazing leader for this area, for our district and our families. So first, I wanted to say that. Secondly, this is maybe one of the most important things we do, but it's the least understood. And so I really appreciate, the things that you've done in terms of our levels of support. I think it's a lot easier for families and students to understand. And so I think that's really important that we're getting this out there a little bit more, so that families or students or the board can really understand all the resources, both public and private, that we can offer our families. And so related to that is the question of, as you look at the screeners, or as we look at kids self-reporting, or parents saying, hey, my student is struggling, can you kind of give us a percentage of where do you find out most where students are struggling? So if you had a pie, maybe, is it students self-reporting to a teacher or counselor, or is it a teacher or counselor that say, hey, I think this kid is struggling, or a parent, or is it through screening? Where are we understanding when our students are struggling? Or is it a mixture?
Well, I think it is a mixture of teachers getting to know their students very well and reporting those to student services, and students coming to student services themselves. I would say that our data that we get from our screeners is good information. It is a lot of times the students that are in those at-risk and high needs areas are students who are already known to the student services staff. So it's more confirmation of it, but the students themselves are getting to student services prior to the screeners, generally speaking. So we will find a student or two every time we do the screener, which is important, right? Like, we wouldn't want to miss anyone. But a lot of times the students are already known to our staff and are already being, building relationships with them.
Would you credit that? I guess the next question is related to our social emotional learning and emotion regulation in younger grades. And now that we've been doing that for quite a while longer now, do we feel like that's part of that students are understanding more about themselves? Or are you seeing also that the work that we've been doing is helping students kind of help themselves?
I think that, yes, I think that is happening, that students are learning and helping themselves more, and I think it is also more acceptable that someone might need a support at some point or another. I think it has become a little bit more acceptable. I hope, anyway. I have one of my student services members here, so she maybe could answer that better than I could, but...
Any other questions, Krista?
No,
Thank you, Krista. I just have a couple of questions. The pandemic grant, is it an annually renewable grant for a period of time? Is it supposed to last over a specific amount of time or just until it's gone?
It was just a one-time thing. It was a Dane County funded grant opportunity, and it was just really one-time funding. So it will go, like I said, until December of '22, unless we run out of the funds earlier. If it looks like we are not able to spend all of the funds, we can certainly seek to shift how we've allocated it or how we've requested it, but right now we're kind of on track.
Okay.
Pretty well.
All right. The other thing that I want to point out is that there are a lot of groups that are available depending on the area of intervention or the area of need. And most of that goes on during the school day, from what I understand. And so I would imagine that it really leans on our educators too, during that absence, when those groups are taking place, to continue to move that student forward so that there isn't a gap. And so, again, it's another area that our educators are going above and beyond to make sure that all the kids who plug into these groups are kept moving forward in their regular schoolwork, the as expected work. And so, again, I want to just stress that I appreciate how much it's taken to keep that ball moving. The last thing is, again, back out to you, Candace. You're the one who leads this effort on grant writing. Is that correct?
Just on that one. I
that
share
one.
those responsibilities with Amy Miller a lot of times, so
Okay.
she's a pretty good grant writer.
Yes. So I really have to hand it to the two of you then for taking the time, because that comes way before all these supports are in place. To have the forethought, to understand where the resources are available, and then to take the time to access those resources is admirable. So I really do appreciate that as well.
Thank you. I owe a lot to the student services team. They are the ones who let me know what we need next, and are really out there working it all the time. So,
well,
thank you.
Matt. One last time, any other questions? Thank you both.
I think we can get it shut off.
Okay, we'll turn it back over to Dr. Bergstrom for the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much. So first, I'll start off with a little bit of an update on postseason play since the last time we were together. So, as we all know, participation in sports is an important part of the high school experience for many of our students, and we know that participating on teams builds all kinds of skills and helps people learn to deal with successes and failures. So if you've been out to any of these end of season tournaments or games, you're able to see a huge outpouring of community support for our students. And I also want to give a little shout out to the boys basketball team, because they had a letter to the Oregon Observer today thanking the community for all the support. It was the seniors on the team who wrote the letter. And I thought that was a wonderful thing to do, because the community really does support our students in all of their endeavors. Athletics, musicals, you name it, they're here for our kids. And, you know, in the words of the Youth Task Force, we love watching you play. So it was a wonderful experience to watch the boys over the past week. And of course, our hockey team made it to the sectional finals. And we know that our girls team made it to the regional semifinals. So watching them play has been a wonderful thing for the community, and I'm sure for the families who were able to watch their kids do what they love. Now, we also want to say, and this is such an appropriate time, because we did our mental health update, and it also happens to be School Social Workers Week. So we wanted to say thank you to our amazing social work staff, and you see three wonderful people here. Amy and Amanda and Caitlin and Daniela, and remember the days, those of you who are on the board for a little bit of time, we didn't have any social workers, and now we have 4, and we don't know what we would do without them. So very, very appreciative of all the work they do for our students. Also, one other group I can't say enough good things about, and that is our food service staff. I don't know if they have been fully staffed since the day school opened, and yet they are pulling it off every single day, and not just lunch, but breakfast too. So I think it was DPI that put together the Breakfast Heroes Award, and we were awarded because of all of the breakfast that's being served at our schools. So good job to food service and everything they do for our kids every day. And then our Math 24 participants. This is a math competition for grades 4 through 8. And we had high school students volunteering to help out the younger students, and they go to Union South. And our students did a fantastic job. And look, you can see them holding up their math medals, and it's pretty cool. We've also had some local artists displayed at the Firefly and the Kickback Cafe. If you are in either establishment, please take a look, because you'll see that we have pieces of art created by our students on display at both places. And then just a little fun piece that was on social media, and that we have a Rome Corners class. This is Miss Bratt's class, and they showcase their research and learning on the U.S. Constitution by making these, these, I don't know, bubbles. I think the writing bubbles is what they're called. So they get to use a variety of, I don't know, skills to put together to show what they've learned related to the Constitution. And that is a complex document, and the fact that we have our Rome Corner students engaging in discussions about the Constitution warms my heart. It was also mentioned today, the Courage Retreat. This was for all 7th graders at the middle school, and we had one group come, and then the other group came, meaning the 2 teams of kids. So the group was big, but it wasn't all 300 at one time. And I remember Dr. Anderson sharing some stories with the administrative team of just how much impact this has had. And I think it's this week they fill out their 2nd post-retreat survey, because I believe they were all challenged to do something kind in an anonymous way. And so they're going to be checking to see, you know, what are some of the cool things that people have done for others as a part of this Courage Retreat. Speaking of doing cool things for others, this was also mentioned in the mental health report, and that's the OHS Hope Squad. And, you know, they are there to provide support for their peers who are suffering from mental health concerns, but also to make sure people know that there is hope and they are cared for. And that is a pretty important part of making sure every single student feels like they belong, is that it's not just their teachers, but it's their peers reaching out too. It's, you know, what can you do? It's March 14th. It's Pie Day, right? So that is a really big deal at the high school. And when I was an associate principal here, there were pie eating contests, you name it. We wouldn't do that anymore because it's not a good idea. But but it was a big emphasis on really, really fun stuff related to 3.14. And this is a design by Remy Cooper, so great job, Remy. The choir concert that our student board representatives mentioned, that was held, it was last week, you guys, right? Yeah, yes. So another lovely event. And then another one of our students, this is really cool, Kate Davis, a high school student, received the FFA Lewis M. Sassman Award. It was given by the Kiwanis Club from downtown Madison, and it's given to an outstanding student from each of the FFA chapters in Dane County high schools. And Mr. Sassman, the person who the award is named for, was a state supervisor for vocational education for 36 years and was a member of the Kiwanis Club of downtown Madison. So this award is given in his honor, and Kate Davis was the recipient. So congratulations, Kate. And then a school to career spotlight. This is one of our students. He's a senior. His name is Adam. He's been working at one community bank since his junior year. He plans to go to Madison College and then take that into a business and finance degree at UW-Whitewater. He says he really likes helping customers have a great experience. And this can range from processing their transactions quickly and accurately to helping them over the phone with their online banking. And he's always willing to answer the phone, help the customer, or connect the customer with the right person at one community bank. So Adam's an example of some of the really great school to career opportunities that our students have, and I'm glad he's making the most of this. And then we'll kind of end the superintendent's report today with a video from our 6th grade orchestra students who were invited to play at the Capitol, and boy, did they sound good. So this is the end of the concert when they were able to play On Wisconsin. So Katie's going to play it for you. Communications director and I were walking up the stairs, we heard them start to play, and we thought, oh, well, there must be other groups here because that can't be a 6th grade orchestra. And then we turned the corner and it was our kids, and they sounded so great. So it was a wonderful experience for them and certainly for the people who were able to go there and watch. And that's it for the superintendent's report.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. Any questions at all regarding the superintendent's report? I have to tell you, I was at the bank today in the drive-through, and it is so interesting that Adam was the one you focused on because he was the kid in the window. He was the guy in the window. And I literally thought to myself as I was pulling out, that bank has got something going with the kids they hire there. They are awesome. And I see lots of new faces, but it's like they've been there for a long time. They just seem so comfortable and so engaged, and they're not just processing transactions. I worked for a bank for 10 years, and we never had tellers like that. It was awesome. So it's so interesting that he was the one on the screen. Future agenda. Our next meeting is on March 28th. Some of the things that will be on the agenda, we'll get an initial look at the staffing report, it sounds like. We'll have an update on the Esser funding priorities, the discussion that started some time ago. Portrait of a Graduate will be talked about as we approach the publishing of that work. We'll have an update on Worth Woods following our meetings at Fitchburg this week. Anything else that we want to make sure that we cover on that next? Health insurance, biggie. That's a biggie. So health insurance will also be covered during that meeting. Is there anything else before we go to checkout? All right. Troy, anything from you? All right. Kevin.
Yeah, a lot of great recognition tonight across the board, not just sports, but other extracurriculars and music and what have you. So it's fantastic to see all that's going on in the district. You know, the accomplishment for the basketball team was really cool. I mean, if you look at how long it's been since they've been to the sectional final and the momentum it built in the community and how they've developed a program that kids now dream about playing someday. I think that's super cool, and I'm sure that's going on in a lot of our sports. So super cool to see. Also, I just want to call out another one of our students. It's a little self-serving because it's my niece, Sophie Swartzmiller. She does not compete for the school district, but she competes for herself in gymnastics at a very high level, both regionally and nationally. And she's been on an absolute roll lately. Taking first, second, and then this past weekend in Green Bay, sweeping the all around. She's been incredibly dedicated, traveling to Milwaukee 6 days a week for her training. So just super proud of her, and wanted to call her out because, you know, obviously she's not competing for Oregon, but really doing some great things, and I'm super proud of her.
Thank you, Kevin. Before I finish up with Anna, I want to go back to Sam and Olivia. Anything else you'd like to add to tonight's meeting?
I think your guys' presentation was awesome. To see that, you know, student services is paying this much attention and, you know, providing all this data for, I mean, as a student, like, I did not know any of that was going on. And it is, I mean, it's, you know, it's awesome to see that, you know, I was thinking about this. We had like something called, I think, Refocus Room or something when I was in middle school. And I know that was like, you know, some people knew about it, some people don't, but I'm glad that we have a dedicated space now that kids can go to. So I think that's really cool. And then the outside counseling, you know, with the Dane County grant it's awesome to hear too that, you know, kids are able to get counseling through outside practitioners. So yeah.
I agree with Sam. I think that that presentation was really wonderful, and I think like all of that is super great, and that's all I have to add.
Anna.
The only thing I'll mention is that I attended the choir concert that was referenced a couple of times this past week. I have a daughter who is in the choir, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. The music coming from our students is incredible. It was like, I didn't pay money to go. I was just free, you know? We just can go to these concerts and hear beautiful music. It was held on International Women's Day, and there was a piece that was performed by I think the 10th grade girls that was a cappella, and it was focused on, it was a strong woman song, and it had this great beat, and they all stood up, and it was just, it gave me goosebumps. It was incredible. So I just wanted to big shout out to all of our choir teachers and music teachers and our amazingly talented students.
Krista.
Yeah, I just have one. You know, it's we've always been a community that had, you know, community members see a need and they step up. So I want to give a shout out to John Keel. For years, our district has participated in the CYO Basketball League, which is basically an intramural basketball league, and the couple that ran it for years retired. So we have a bunch of kids who love to play basketball but maybe don't want to be on the organized team or maybe aren't good enough to have made that team. And so John became a commissioner and organized that league for Oregon High School this year, and I think had 6 to 8 teams, and they just finished their championship yesterday, letting the kids play in the big gym. And so, you know, he did that all on his own time. And so I really want to thank John for giving, you know, 50 to 60 kids, both boys and girls, that opportunity this winter. So thanks, John.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'd just like to tag on to that. I have seen Jim Pliner with those CYO basketball teams for so many years. And all the things Jim Pliner does to make that happen as well, I want to recognize also. The last thing I want to say is, and this is more for Sam and Olivia and for all your friends at school, this is where community spirit starts. It starts with you guys. You make it very easy to have community spirit. Doesn't mean we have to win the championship, but the things we get to go to as parents, awesome. Awesome. So thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone.